What does it take to transform our society to a carbon-neutral and circular place to live in? The answer might be counterintuitive. It's more mining. My name is Florian Anderhuber. I work for Euromines, the voice of the European mining industry, covering more than 50 different minerals and metals. For 65% of its clean tech, Europe is depending on China. And for some metals and minerals, this dependency goes up to nearly 100%. And this comes at an environmental cost. For example, nickel refined in Indonesia comes with 30 times the carbon footprint than nickel refined in Europe would come. And these products are more competitive in price. Bringing these products into Europe make a sustainable and clean value chain economically unviable. The huge demands for minerals and metals, the disconnect of the society of the role of minerals and metals in a decarbonized world, as well as the reality of modern mining, sparked the interest of today's guest in this industry, Peter Tom Jones. Welcome to the first episode of our podcast. With us is Peter Tom Jones, director of the prestigious KU Leuven Institute for Sustainable Metals and Minerals. You are the Senior Innovation Manager for Sustainable Metallurgy, covering both hydrometallurgy and pyrometallurgy. You have a very prolific academic career, and next to it, you are making movies. So you're a very highly sought-after interview partner, so we're very happy to have you here. Peter, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So please,
looking forward to it. Yeah.
Me too. Please tell us a bit more about your work inside and outside of KU Leuven.
Well, as you already mentioned, I'm director of the KU Leuven Institute for Sustainable Metals and Minerals, or in short, SIM2, which is a massive group of people of almost 300 researchers that are involved, very interdisciplinary. So we have geologists, all types of engineers, chemists, economists, legal people, to cover all aspects of metal production, sustainability of metal production, recycling, extraction, processing, refining. And we're very strongly focused on energy transition metals because we want to produce the metals to save the world, to save the planet, and also steel. So green steel is also a big part of our activities. Personally, I'm not involved in teaching anymore. So my main job is working together with industry and with other research organizations, especially in a large multi-partner European project. And that's also where we make our documentaries, because documentaries are deliverables within the European project.
Okay, how many documentaries have you made so far?
I'm not a director, let's also be clear on that. So I'm the person who thinks behind the scenes, and I'm the presenter of the documentary. So that means that I interview the people and I do the stand-ups. But our director is Stijn van Baarle of Storyrunner. And together we have now made 4 major documentaries. The first one was called Responsible Mining in Europe. Second one was about the whole value chain from mine to electric vehicle, made in Europe. Then we had a very difficult one. That was an interview and documentary with the Sami people. So the reindeer herding Sami, to show also their perspective on mining in Kiruna and the north of Sweden. And then our most recent edition is Europe's Mining Renaissance, Catalyst for Climate Neutrality, a very controversial title.
This is a very controversial item, but fascinating the topics that you're looking at. So you're an expert in field in industrial ecology, right? And and you look into sustainability in a very holistic approach. So it is not just the easy way out of saying circularity and degrowth are the right answers to it. What, according to you, would be the right answer to it? Where is your focus on mining coming from? What was it that got you so interested in this industry?
Well, I'm always someone who likes to think in terms of the whole system, to try to find a comprehensive view and not just zoom in to the details of something and then forget the bigger picture. I think that's the Western disease, that most people in the West, we are so focused on something that we forget to see the connections. So for me, what triggered me to start making these documentaries is actually the report of the International Energy Agency, where they calculated that to meet the Paris Climate Agreement goals, we need an unbelievable amount of energy transition metals. That's where the numbers come from. Lithium times 42 by 2040 compared to 2020. Cobalt and nickel times 20, rare earths times 7. And also for copper and many other key transition metals, we need large quantities, because if we want to replace a fossil fuel-based society, we need to have something in the place. So you can't just do something without anything. So a lot of people don't understand that. But if you want to have a climate neutral economy, we need something driving it. And metals are the things that drive this economy. The heat pumps, the electrolyzers, the wind turbines, the EVs, the photovoltaic panels. Without metals, there is no green transition.
It doesn't come from out of the blue, right?
No, we have the laws of thermodynamics which govern everything.
And the IEA report, it is a very, very interesting read. And it is something that really shakes up your mind when you're going through it. So do we have all of these metals in the Earth crust? Do we have enough metals to get to these flabbergasting numbers, 40 times more lithium?
Yeah, it's never a problem of geological scarcity. That's not the issue. It's about the criticality in terms of supply risks and the distribution of metals over the planet. Of course, some regions are way more resource rich than other regions. For example, where I live, Belgium, we have no critical metals. We are very poor. If you compare that with DRC, of course, it's a completely different picture. But coming back to these numbers of times 42 for lithium, that's of course flabbergasting, that number. And I also want to relativate that, because that is all in a business as usual scenario where we all still keep thinking in terms of the same type of systems that we operate. So for me, it's more complicated than just saying, let's replace every ICEV car by an electric car. We also need to think in terms of systems. So that means we need to think in terms of car sharing systems, better spatial planning, better public transport. So we need to look at the whole picture. But even if we do that, we can definitely drive the 42 times number down. But it would still be times 20, times 25. We would still need loads of metals, even in a post-consumerist, completely differently organized, more sustainable society. We would still need metals. And then my question also to the environmental groups is, where are we going to get the metals from? That's the fundamental question.
You ran a few times as a green policymaker. What are the colleagues from this party telling you when you ask this question?
I think there's still a lot of thinking to do by a lot of the green political movements to really fully understand what we are talking about here. So the transition from a fossil fuel-based economy towards a climate neutral economy will require metals. I mean, that's a given.
That's a given.
And I see a disconnection often when I talk to people. For example, I'm also very active in the city of Leuven, where we have this huge transition management policy where the city of Leuven wants to become climate neutral by 2030, 2040. So much faster than the rest of Europe. To do so, we will need to transition in terms of our mobility system, our energy system, and our housing system. So in our houses, we'll need heat pumps in order to heat our houses. In our mobility system, we'll need public transport, electric public transport. We'll need electric bikes, electric cars, shared electric cars, ideally. And in our energy system, we'll need wind turbines, we'll need PV panels, we'll need battery storage, stationary battery storage facilities. So altogether, you need metals, and those metals need to be included in clean tech products. The problem today, though, is that 65% of these clean tech products are coming from China, and this number is going up year by year. We see this for the EVs. We saw it in the past for the PV panels. We're seeing it for the wind turbines. So are we solving the problem if for our climate transition, we are then buying Chinese PV panels that are made with slave labor from Uyghur people who have been working on that, with metals that were produced in terrible circumstances? Is that our comprehensive solution? No, obviously it isn't. So I want people to connect those dots and to see the bigger picture.
So it is really a sustainability in the purest sense of the term. Sustainability is not just the use of the product, it's also where is this product coming from and what are the social costs that coming with it.
Yeah, let's also indeed talk about the social aspects. How are things manufactured? How are things being produced. We all know
you just mentioned Uyghur slave labor.
We know about the terrible situation in a lot of mines in the world where conditions are atrocious, where biodiversity is being destroyed, where we have terrible child labor, slave labor, but also in the downstream manufacturing plants. We know that in the Uyghur region, many companies are active there producing products, clean tech products, which are then bought by European consumers. So I don't think that's the genuine answer.
No, I fully agree with you in this case. So one thing is where the deposits are, one thing is where the production is taking place. Europe, we see at the beginning of the 20th century, Europe was one of the major mining regions. So there is a proud tradition, there's a lot of knowledge around it, and this gradually declined over time. What do you think is the reason for that? And where do we still have like a cutting-edge advantage over the rest of the world? What is the added value of European mining compared to,
I think in terms of mining in Europe, people also don't understand the differences. I mean, we have to clearly make a distinction between coal mines, and you have quite a few of those in Germany still today and in Poland, and between coal mines that are creating the problem. If we extract coal and burn it to produce energy, we're producing CO2, driving the climate problem. And the next year we have to do the same thing because it's the dissipative use of what we extract. When we mine metals, we're building up the stocks in the economy that is required to drive the climate transition. So it's a completely different type of mining. And for a lot of people, they don't even see this difference. So they equate coal mining with the mining of lithium or nickel, for example, whereas lithium and nickel are essential for this climate transition. And I see this in many, even scientific reports, where they look at the material footprint of our way of life. They just aggregate coal with nickel mining or with lithium mining. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. We should not compare apples with pears. So yes, mining has a bad name. Also in my country, in Belgium, we had coal mines in the past, and people associate that with terrible working conditions, with people covered in soot, with people getting cancer very early in their life. So mining in that way has a very bad aura because people think it's that type of mining. And now, of course, still today, if you look at cobalt mining in DRC, you get similar images of kids crawling in holes to manually try to dig out cobalt rocks. So a lot of the way of thinking is driven by these images, these iconic images of what is going bad. But then, of course, we see we can do it completely differently. For our documentary work, we have visited Kiruna, Aitik, Kevitsa. So these are three, for me, real benchmark examples of how modern mining can be done in a responsible way from an environment, social, governance point of view. High salaries, safe working conditions, good environmental management, they take care of the water systems that they have, green electricity, automated jobs using PlayStation controllers to manage the equipment in the mine. I mean, that's how a modern mine looks like. It's completely different from the images that people have of the coal mines in Belgium for 40, 50 years ago, or cobalt mines in DRC today. But people need to see that. And I think that's why it's so important to have visual images. And documentary work, for me, is way more exciting than writing scientific papers, because scientific papers is communicating to my peers. And I've done a lot of that, but I don't have the impression that that is making the difference in this world. So a documentary can trigger something, can make something change.
And your film that brought you now to northern Sweden and also to northern Finland, you mentioned Kevitsa here. What was your biggest takeaway that you encountered? What made you go wow when you saw it? Something that you haven't known before, something that you haven't seen before.
For me, the biggest surprise was that the local population in Kiruna was so strongly in favor of the mining activities. Because for our documentary, we were doing a vox pop, which means that we go with a microphone and we try to interview people randomly in the streets, and we were trying to find different voices. Some who are in favor, some who are against, and we were standing there for hours and hours, and we couldn't find one single person that had anything negative to say about the mining activity. So for me, it became clear that those communities that have been living in and around those kind of proper mines, responsible mines in that area, they understand how it works. They see the benefits. They are connected to it. They realize that those companies are not cowboy companies. So they're not fly in, fly out companies, just come there to steal the resources, fly away, leave a big hole, leave environmental damage. No, these companies, they have a very clear connection with the people and with the communities there. So they care for these people and these communities. Of course, I'm not saying that every single person and every single community there is completely in favor of the activities. I also did interviews with the leader of the Sami, of one of the leaders of the Sami parliament. So it became clear that the reindeer herding Sami community is not in favor of the mining activity there. But that's a very small group. We're talking about 5,000 people in Sweden.
I mean, looking at this issue, so this is not in my backyard attitude. This is essentially what you're saying here. I mean, if I were a Sami reindeer herder and I know there is a mine in the grazelands that I want to use, I would also be rather critical of this mine, of course.
But for me, that's what I also learned by speaking to the Sami people and speaking to many other people on Parcours de Route of making all these documentaries. For me, there is NIMBY and there is NIMBY. I'll explain to you what I mean with that. There is the NIMBY of the people who drive Teslas, have smartphones and laptops and fly all over the world for city trips, and who object to mining activities. They're hypocrites in my view, very clearly, because they want all the luxury that is driven by the need for these metals, but they don't want to see or they don't want to be confronted with the potential impact of such a mining activity. And then you have the opposition of the reindeer herding Sami who have lived in and with nature for centuries in that area. We have a traditional lifestyle and they are much truer to their word. So they basically reject the modern consumerist way of living. So they don't want nothing to do with that. So it's way more authentic for them to object to a mining activity there than it is to a Tesla driver here in anywhere else in Europe. And for me, that's what also became clear when I presented the film in Sweden and we were discussing the difference between the Per Geir rare earth deposit in Kiruna and the Norra Kärr rare earth deposit in the south of Sweden. So the Per Geir deposit in the north of Sweden, and the biggest rare earth deposit in Europe, owned by LKAB, probably at some point will come to fruition. And people actually want it to happen, apart from the reindeer herding Sami community. But then you have this rare earth Norra Kärr mine in the south of Sweden, which contains the heavy rare earths that we really need to add to our electric motors, the dysprosium. And there we have huge NIMBY opposition, in many cases from people who live in Stockholm, who have summer houses close to that mining area. So they object to that mine, but on the other hand, they want the mine in Per Geir to open. So you see that even in Sweden, there is a difference in the way one looks at a mining activity in the north, where the Sami live, together with other people, of course, and in the south, where the rich Swedes have their summer houses.
This is really hypocritical. Probably also people that are driving then with an electric car to their summer house.
Yeah, exactly. And in Sweden, there are a lot of electric cars.
There are a lot of electric cars.
So, and that's what I'm saying. People do not critically reflect upon their own behavior. They don't realize that basically our whole modern society is based on, at a certain moment, extraction of metals. Without metals in the past that were extracted, we would not have buildings, we would not have houses, would not have mobility, we would not have energy production. It's all based on metals. At a certain moment, something had to be extracted.
Would you say your movies are like putting the mirror to the people that are in a modern consumerist society?
Yeah, and of course, people do not like me saying that Europeans want Teslas, but they don't want the mines in their backyard, and they're bloody hypocrites. A lot of people get very angry with me because they say, yeah, but I don't want a Tesla. But maybe that's right. They might not want a Tesla, but they still have laptops. They still have phones. They still have all the modern equipment, which is metal intensive. And I don't want to see that connection.
Yeah. What will you say to me, for example? So I live here in Brussels. I have a very nice view of my apartment onto a park. This park should have been developed to new houses. And there was a very big neighborhood initiative against this project in the end. So this would also somehow fit into the same not in my backyard, or even into the banana principle. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone.
For me, the banana principle is still something else. Banana meaning build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything or anyone. That's like a NIMBY square principle. So that's like NIMBY to the next level. And with that, I don't mean any kind of potential resistance against certain projects, because of course, in some cases, it makes sense not to have something in a certain area. I'm not saying that we should accept anything. That's not what I'm saying. When we use the word banana, we're referring to a situation where basically it becomes impossible to do anything. And this is particularly relevant for very densely populated regions like Flanders or the Netherlands, where the banana principle is really very, very clear. So in Flanders, we will have a huge problem to provide the permits for a company like Umicore, who would like to build one of the best state-of-the-art lithium-ion battery recycling plants. So even the greenest of the greenest projects that you can imagine, it would still be blocked, because in a densely populated region, there is always someone who tries to block something. And when those people know the legal principles of how it can work, then they can basically hijack the rest of the population. And that's what is happening for me in the West more and more. We see that we live in a dictatorship of a vocal minority. So it's the opposite of the dictatorship of the majority that we have in many other cases in the world. But here it's turned on its head. So we can have a situation where even the best, the cleanest, the greenest, the most beautiful project will still get blocked, because there's 5 or 10 people who organize themselves, start a legal procedure, make sure there are delays in the principles, in the permitting, until the companies say, we'll go somewhere else. And we see that all the time in Flanders, and also in the Netherlands. We see it's becoming impossible to have any kind of industry, even if it's the cleanest clean tech industry. It's becoming impossible to find the permits. Is that what we want? Do we want to become an industrial museum in Europe?
Probably not.
Yeah, but that's what's happening. This process is happening insidiously. We see this step by step. It's not like a big avalanche where suddenly everything changes. No, it's slowly, step by step. We see the pieces falling, the companies closing down.
Have you ever encountered like the counter example of it, where the local population was suddenly in favor of a mine?
Well, I think in Kiruna, people say Bimby or Pimby. Pimby, please, in my backyard, or Bimby, better in my backyard. And the people are happy there. In Kiruna, they have the opposite problem. There is a problem in Kiruna with finding nurses and teachers for the hospitals and the schools. You know why?
The infrastructure.
You know why?
Because they all want to work in the mine?
They all want to work in the mine, because the salaries are much higher in the mine, even for teachers and nurses. So that shows that you can have mines which give really good conditions to people, working conditions in terms of safety, in terms of salary, in terms of holiday pay. Obviously, most mining areas in the world, that's not the case.
No.
But again, we show that Sweden, Finland, they're number 1 and 2 in terms of ESG, environment, social, and governance, in the mining area globally.
So, and equality.
And equality
is like the most equal countries there are. So, do you think this is the key for acceptance to mining, creating a stake for those that are affected or those that are living around it?
Yeah, I do think we need to evolve towards models where we have companies like Boliden and LKAB that are connected to the local community and that drive a community-centric benefit-sharing type of mining model, which means that the community needs to share in the profits, and you need to make sure that the jobs in those mines are also going to the people living in those communities, that you don't fly in the people to come and work in the mines, which we see a lot in Africa, where we see that these companies are flying in Chinese people to work in those locations. So it's got to be a local connection to the communities. So they have to profit and prosper from it. And I also see other examples. For example, Rio Tinto in Jadar in Serbia. So they want to start the biggest lithium mining project in Europe with the highest lithium grade of jadarite mineral in that region. And also there, the protests against that mine are led from Belgrade.
Okay.
And that's miles away from the Jadar region, because in the Jadar region itself, population is largely in favor of what would happen there. And it's also clear that Rio Tinto has made this very, very evident that they would create some kind of model in which part of the revenues would flow back to the local communities and to a community trust. So I think that's for me essential. The community has to prosper. Companies have to be connected. Should not be fly in, fly out model. Has to be harmony.
Has to be harmony. No, this is a very, very good point. So would you agree that the closer the population is to the mine, the more they can benefit from it? The more acceptance there is for the mine. And the further away you go, the more critical voices you see in the mine.
I think it's more complicated than that. It's partially the case when there is a relationship to that mining activity that goes back decades. And that's what you see in Kiruna, what you see in Aitik. So the communities that are living there, they have lived with and together with these mines for decades. So they know how it works. They see that they benefit from it. When you have greenfield projects, I think that's the problem that we see with a project like Mina de Barosso in Portugal. So that's a rural farming region where there is no mining activity. So when you come there and you say, okay, we want to build a mine, then that local population might be more hesitant to start that activity, especially if there's been examples in the past of how it was done wrongly. And probably we often see that in the east of Europe, where you have the Soviet history, where mining was done in a very dirty way, and people still remember those. And people still remember those bad examples. So I think we can learn a lot from the north of Sweden and Finland. I think that's really the model to copy in the rest of Europe.
So if Europe is emulating this kind of model, you think there is a chance for a renaissance of mining in Europe? Done clean, done with a lot of stakeholder involvement, giving back to the communities that are affected?
It's certainly our vision to create that. It's also the title of our latest documentary, Europe's Mining Renaissance. But of course, we also live in a complex, global, very turbulent world with more and more wars, more and more resource nationalism, protectionism. And we're seeing now that the prices of a lot of important energy transition metals are really rock bottom. Look at the price of lithium, cobalt, nickel. And as a result, a lot of the mines that are trying to operate in an ESG-friendly way, they are suffering from that because they have to compete with the dirty nickel mines from Indonesia. And at these kind of low prices, I've seen it with my own eyes. I was recently in Evia in Greece, where you have the Larco nickel mines, laterite mines. So they're all on care and maintenance. So rather than opening new mines, we seem to be closing down mines. We have the same with the zinc mine of Boliden in Ireland. That's another one that's on care and maintenance. We see that a company like Euronickel has just gone bankrupt. And that's because the competition with the Indonesian, Chinese nickel is killing us, because they're producing nickel at they're dumping nickel at an extremely low price on the world market at the moment. We know this nickel is being produced with a CO2 footprint which is 20 to 40 times higher than the one in Finland in Harjavalta. But we have to compete with that. So obviously that's not a level playing field. It's not fair. We should defend ourselves against that.
So is it a matter of consumers' choice, always going for the cheapest product that is available on the market? Is it a lack of information? Consumer doesn't understand where the material is coming from? What would you think on this?
Well, I think there are many explanations for that. If you look at it from the consumer perspective, unfortunately, most consumers just think in terms of what's the price that I need to pay. And we see that very clearly now with the tsunami of Chinese electric vehicles that are coming into Europe. So these are 10,000 euros cheaper than an equivalent car that is made in America or made in Europe. And it's just as good. So what are consumers going to do? They're going to buy that cheaper car. Unless you have a very ethical consumer, like myself, I try to live my life like that. I try to go for fair trade coffee and fair trade chocolate, and I'm willing to pay a premium for the consumer products as long as I know that they've been produced in a proper way. But that's a minority of people. Huh?
Yeah, but I mean, on the other hand, bio products and fair trade products, they're always booming. Also during time of inflation, they were less affected by inflation than other goods.
Because it's a specific segment in society that is willing and is also capable financially of paying more. Don't forget, there are a lot of people who don't have the financial resources to pay more for food or to pay more for coffee. So you can understand that a lot of people, either because they don't want to, or because they can't, and they will go for the cheapest product. So that means that we need to do more. We need to have industrial strategy. We need to have an industrial policy in which Europe is allowed to defend itself from these cheap imports of cars that were made in an ESG unfriendly way, that are full of state subsidies all along the value chain. So for me, it's crystal clear that Europe has the right to raise import tariffs to compensate for all those problems.
But then we're also a bit in a conundrum here. So mining in Europe, or really sustainable mining that is incorporating all of the ESG costs to operate on a very sustainable level, is undercut by a business model that is, end of maybe the 19th century Manchester capitalism style of exploiting as much as possible as China is doing. And then on the other hand, precisely these activities of Chinese companies in the Zambia or in Congo bring us time and time again all of those ugly pictures of exploited children, women, destroyed nature. So, and these pictures are feeding back into the public perception here in Europe or in the global West, giving them a very bad image to mining that is done differently, though. How to overcome this?
Yeah, I think we need to make it clear that things can be done in a different way and show the positive examples, exactly what we've been doing in our documentaries. But I think to answer the first part of your question, for me, one of the big problems of Europe is that we live in a system where the whole value chain is chopped up in different silos. So we have the mine, we have the refinery, we have the PCAM plant, the battery gigafactory, we have the battery assembly plant, and we have the final clean tech product, or the EV or the eBus. And every single unit in that value chain wants to make or has to make a profit. So that means that every single unit wants to buy cheap inputs and sell the output as expensively as possible. And then when we are confronted with a situation like today, where cheap nickel is being dumped on the European market, then the mines and the refineries are in trouble. For the battery factories, it's great. They can buy cheap inputs. But tomorrow, the situation might be reversed. Tomorrow, the price of the metals might be extremely high. And then suddenly the battery gigafactory has a problem because they have to pay very expensive input material. So it's always someone losing out. And because we think in silos, we are handicapped. Because what do the Chinese do? It's the whole supply chain is optimized. They don't care if some of the units are losing money, as long as the whole system is effective, as long as they can destroy European competition, as long as the whole value chain wins out. And they have a 20-year strategy. We have a strategy of 2 or 3 years, and then we have new elections, and then someone else comes in. And we are handicapped. We are forced to drive a race. And I have to be careful which car examples I'm going to use now. But I will not use a brand name. We use a very poor ICEV car, and we have to race a Porsche. And then who's going to win, do you think? So as long as we are handicapped like that, I think it's very complicated. So for me, for European Commission and European Parliament, European Council, we really need to start thinking in terms of integration. So now we have our Critical Raw Materials Act, we have our Net Zero Industry Act, but these need to be put together. It needs to be a coherent, comprehensive policy. It doesn't make sense just to look at this without looking at that. It's got to be, the whole thing's got to be optimized at the same time.
Do we even want to compete on this level? This is my other question. I would say no. If a European company that has to compete on environmental degradation and on slave labor, because just the others are doing and they're controlling a large share of the market, wouldn't it be feasible to simply pull out of this competition?
Yeah, personally, I've been defending that idea actually for 20 years. Even my first books I wrote about that. I believe in a deglobalized model where we produce our foods and our clean technologies and our metals and our minerals. We produce them more on a continental scale, the European scale, to a large extent, not completely. It's not like it's only on a European level. But we try to do this mostly on a continental level, and other continents can do the same. Indeed, there is no reason to try to compete with the Chinese model because we basically can't. So I think we need to understand that it makes sense to be strategically autonomous in the metals that we need to drive our clean tech reindustrialization, I should say, so that our decarbonization strategy, our climate strategy, goes hand in hand with a clean tech-based reindustrialization strategy. Because what I see now is that we have this European Green Deal, where it's not combined with an industrial deal. So the Green Deal was developed before COVID, before the war in Ukraine, before the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative taken over the whole world. And just to try to copy that model from then to the situation now is suicide. So we really need to combine the industrial deal with the Green Deal and make sure the Green Deal survives. I'm not one of those persons who are trying to say, let's forget about solving the climate problem. We have to do our bit. We're only with 6% of the world population, but we're still extremely responsible for what we do here. So we should do our bit, but we have to combine it with a welfare model that can be maintained.
Yeah. No one wants to dial back the Green Deal. This is, I think, out of the question.
Well, I do think politically there are a lot of groups who want to do that. I see the extreme right taking over in many parts of Europe. Look at Hungary, but not only Hungary, even in France and many other parts in the world, we see extreme right trying to take over, and they don't want to save the planet.
Yeah, but that's not how industrial investment works. Industrial investments looks into 20 years into the future, and you set already the tracks now. So
there's a mismatch between political groups versus CEOs of companies. They know what they do in the long term. They know that there is no other way than decarbonization. Steel-making CEOs realize that we need to drastically reduce our CO2 footprint. We need to go into DRI steel-making, electric arc furnace steel-making, more scrap. In the end, with hydrogen, doing the reduction there. So yes, these people know that, but we have populist politicians taking over all the world politically, and they have different views, unfortunately.
The investments are set. The course of the industry, I think, is going into the right direction at the moment. The question is just, is it done in a way, or can it be done in a way that we can maintain our competitiveness, and what are the parameters on which we compete? So ESG is a non-price factor, essentially. Have you come across during your research models where those non-price issues are included in the definition of the best product? Is it just public procurement where we see this, or is it also in normal consumer goods?
Well, in the Net Zero Industry Act, the idea is to include those criteria in public tenders. So theoretically, we would like to do that in Europe, but are we doing it at the moment? We aren't. I can give you a very good example, which is very painful in Belgium. That's the big public tender of the public transport company, the LAN, who did a public tender to buy electric buses. And the results of that public tender was buying Chinese buses, even though we have we had two major bus producers in Flanders. And what did we do? We organized a public tender. and we put 70% of the weight on the price, and only 30% was about sustainability and the warranty of the battery. We didn't even talk about cybersecurity. We didn't talk about the real ESG aspect of the production of the metals that went into those things. We didn't even look at that. But of course, the Chinese came out on top because 70% of the result was driven by price, and we can't compete, obviously, on the level of price. So we see that on a political level, at this moment, our public tenders are still being driven by price, and that is, of course, essential to change. And I think we have other possibilities there, especially if you talk about the mine to electric car supply chain. We have a huge market in Europe for company cars, and company cars is now one area where you can really drive the development of cars. If we force through the legal system that companies can only buy company cars that are made in an ESG-friendly way, then we know that the largest volumes of cars that are being bought in Europe that are company cars will be the ones that we want. And after 3 or 4 years, they will become available on the second-hand market and can be bought by other people. So it's a massive lever to change the car system in a sustainable direction from all angles. So I think we do have possibilities, but we really need to start doing that.
So thank you very much for tuning in to this very first episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will sign up and listen in next time. Thank you.